They know it's a hoax, it's a witch hunt, and it's just a continuation. It's been going on now for almost 3 years. And it probably started before I even won the election, based on what we're finding out with the insurance policy quotes and other things. So it's a disgrace.
It's a disgrace, says the president, and we are coming to you, ladies and gentlemen, the day after President Trump was impeached. Only the third president in the history of the United States to be impeached by the House. But Jeff, a lot of people on the Republican side are saying this was a sham and not a true impeachment.
Yes, Jeff Berkowitz here in Chicago Bureau Chief, Illinois Channel, Public Affairs. I think if you look at this, it's kind of has a Christmas spirit to it because it's almost a fantasy. Okay, look, I have Democratic friends, I have Republican friends like you do, Terry. The Democrats, a number take this very seriously. In their view, the big picture, this guy, they would say, obviously put pressure on a foreign government to help him dig up dirt on his opponent, getting a foreign government to interfere, they would say, with the 2020 election, did not faithfully execute the laws to protect the national security. This an ally was being played with.
Well, I think the thing is the issue of why they were impeaching kept going back and forth, didn't it? I mean,
no, but this has
it was
been
about bribery one week. It was about
Right.
something else another week. It was, it kept changing. We didn't hear about the Russian collusion. Look, we are wrapping up the third year of the Trump presidency, and as people rightly point out, you had people on the Democratic side of the aisle calling for his impeachment during the first week, within literally minutes of the man taking the oath of office. So as you may also remember, people famously said resist. So the president can honestly say, that's not a partisan comment, that he has had opposition from the Democrats in the House since the moment basically that he became the president.
All of that is true in terms of the last 3 years. But to be fair, we try to be fair, Terry, the actual case for impeachment that Adam Schiff and his colleagues put on in the House did obviously focus on Ukraine. Didn't really, I think, bribery was something they contemplated, extortion, but I don't think that was a part of the Adam Schiff case in the House, was it? I don't think so. So I think it was a clean case for impeachment. I'm not saying I favor it. I'm not saying.
What do you mean by a clean case? There were two articles of impeachment. One was obstruction of Congress, and the other was the abusing of the presidential powers. Of course, we had other people, including Jonathan Turley, a law professor, I believe, at Georgetown, who testified earlier that he said it was Congress that was actually abusing their powers by impeaching on such flimsy evidence. But Jeff, let's take a listen to just a flavor of the debate that happened in the House floor on the day of impeachment. And we are going to hear from two congressmen, one Republican from Illinois, Darren LaHood, and then Adam Schiff.
Impeachment is and should be the nuclear option, reserved for the most treasonous activity and the most serious activity. Clearly, that has been not met here. As I've reviewed the facts and evidence as a former federal prosecutor, I've read the transcripts, I've watched the hearings, I've read the whistleblower report. That has not been met here. In addition, this process has lacked fairness, due process, and transparency.
What is the distinction here is the seriousness of the conduct. This remedy was put in the Constitution for a reason. It's not an unconstitutional remedy. It is part of the Constitution. The only way you can conceive of this remedy as being unconstitutional is if you believe, as the president does, that he is the state, that anything that opposes him opposes the state, is by definition anti-constitutional. But that, of course, is nonsense. But it is more than nonsense. It is dangerous nonsense.
So Jeff, dangerous nonsense, according to Adam Schiff, and he was obviously managing the debate for a period of time there on the floor.
Look, both sides are guilty of not really doing this right. I mean, really, Schiff should say what I said. Look, this is about Ukraine. This is about a president who, in his view, didn't execute the laws faithfully. Okay, because he had a law that was supposed to say, here's aid to the Ukraine, his military aid. He should have just said, here it is. Okay, there should have been no suspicion that he had done anything to hold it up. By the way, folks, he said, by the way, we've got this thing about an issue with Joe Biden as a part of a broader effort in terms of corruption. Okay, obviously you're there in Ukraine. This occurred in Ukraine. We would like you to look at that. It's very simple. Just do it that way. And and obviously, the Republicans should say, of course, impeachment is a part of the Constitution. And there's nothing unconstitutional, obviously, about impeaching. Obviously, it's part of the Constitution. Doesn't make any sense. The question, of course, is this an impeachable offense? And then and the Republicans should have argued it isn't. They spent all of this time on this and that. They were afraid to just put it on and say, this is not an impeachable offense, and explain what I just
Well, I
said.
think they made that. I think they argued that. They didn't argue one point. They did argue that this was not impeachable and that the president didn't do anything impeachable. Let's listen.
But they have to explain it. They have to explain it, Terry. You can't just
Well,
you can't argue conclusions.
that we have had hours and hours and months. People have made every conceivable argument here. I don't think you can say accurately that the Republicans have not made their case. I think they've made it and then some, and so have the Democrats. I mean, we've gone around and around with this. As we tape this on the 19th, Senator Mitch McConnell, this is the day after impeachment passed the House, Senator Mitch McConnell spoke today on the Senate floor. Let's just take a listen to what he said, because again, the trial under the Constitution is in the Senate.
The House Judiciary Committee told a federal court this very week that it will continue its impeachment investigation even after voting on these articles. And multiple Democratic members have already called publicly for more. If the Senate blesses this, if the nation accepts this, presidential impeachments may cease being a once-in-a-generation event and become a constant part of the political background noise. This extraordinary tool of last resort may become just another part of the arms race of polarization.
And as we know, the nation is really divided on this. It was a pure partisan vote. I don't know if that's ever happened before in an impeachment. Maybe, I don't know the vote under Andrew Johnson, but it was bipartisan under both Presidents Nixon and Clinton. And
Wait a second. Do you know the vote? What was you say?
not one Republican voted for impeachment in the House.
No, I'm talking about what was the vote with Bill Clinton.
I don't have the count,
You said it was bipartisan? I don't think it was.
No, it was bipartisan.
Well, okay. I guess we it's an empirical fact. Neither of us has the numbers there.
I don't have the count.
I mean, I don't know what numbers would make it bipartisan. I wouldn't know how many, but I think pretty much.
The other thing that's happened now is the Democrats were arguing that we had to rush it. The Republicans are saying, why are you trying to rush this? And they would argue that this is the nation is at risk. Today, Nancy Pelosi, we don't apologize for not having the video on that, but Nancy Pelosi came out and said she was not going to send the articles of impeachment over to the Senate until she sees how the Senate organizes its impeachment. Senator Schumer had wanting to call 4 witnesses. The Republican Mitch McConnell had said, it's the House that raises the article of impeachments. We just decide on the articles. We don't do a further investigation. That's not our job.
We're kind of getting in the weeds. Terry.
I want people to understand the process. Part of what we are here for is not just to give people the opinions of others, but to understand so they know. The other thing is, and this is key, the House has to pass a resolution following the vote, and they have not yet done that. when they had the impeachment of Bill Clinton, the House immediately passed the resolution of impeachment to accompany the vote, and it went over, or accompany the articles of impeachment. So they immediately did that, and it then processed over to the Senate. So
Let's go to the big picture. Let's give it, really, we've spent a lot of time on this. I don't think we've gotten to the big picture yet. Both of us, I think, have not done a good job of that. Let's see if we can do it in the next minute or two, okay? Here's the big picture, folks. Look, I made the argument, if I said, here's an argument that the Democrats could make. I said, here's an argument the Republicans could make. But if I were trying to be really fair and look at this in some sort of thoughtful way, putting it in perspective, look, what happened with Nixon, a burglary, nobody knows to this day really what it was about, but there was no doubt as to the cover-up. There was no doubt as to Nixon's involvement in the cover-up. There was no doubt that that was wrong, that was a crime. There was plenty of allegations about using the FBI or attempting to, or the CIA improperly. Bad, 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 okay? Not faithful execution of the laws. Nobody had any doubts. That's why he resigned, because he wasn't going to go through the impeachment process, number one. Number two, take a look at Bill Clinton. Perjury, a definite crime. Was it an impeachable offense? Looking at it now, I think it was a mistake, looking back, for the Republicans to do that. It was not a kind of a policy thing. It's not really what we're tending to deal with impeachment, but it was a crime.
it was a crime, and Bill Clinton had his law
He admitted
license
to it.
pulled for committing perjury
I understand.
and trying to get others, without getting into the weeds of that 25 years ago, trying to get others to lie under oath.
But it wasn't what, here's my, just look at, it's not the kind of thing we want to focus on for impeachment.
Well, let me
They could do it, they did do it.
That
But I
might
wanna
be,
bring us to the
but let me
current.
jump ahead
Let's go
here.
to the current.
Hang on.
Let's just go to the current.
What
let's go to the current.
I am. I'm trying to
Okay.
get a word in here.
Okay.
The point
Get a
is,
word.
following the vote on Clinton's impeachment, the Republicans paid a price for impeaching Bill Clinton, and that's when he was obviously guilty of a crime. But still, when it came to the following November, the Republicans lost control, and many of the people who had led the call for impeaching Clinton lost their own seats. So looking ahead, we will have to, this is going to obviously be a major issue. We'll have to see, certainly, to what extent will this linger over and become an issue? Will the Democrats pay a price for this impeachment, as the Republicans did back in after following their vote for impeaching Clinton? Now, that said, even today we had a Congressman, Jeff Van Drew, who was a Democrat, a conservative Democrat, but he voted against the impeachment. He was, I think, one of the only Democrats who did. And he today flipped to the Republicans. President greeted him in the Oval Office, and they welcomed Mr. Van Drew from the Democratic aisle to the Republican Party.
Okay. But the overriding point here that I was trying to make before, this had no business being thought of as an impeachable matter. And you can say, well, the big issue is, will it pay a price? No, the big issue is, should somebody realize and say that, looking at it objectively, there should have been no impeachment here. That's all. And there's been very little discussion of that, of the substance. And I think the Republicans could have done a better job of making that case from the get-go as to impeachment over Ukraine. But moving on,
impeachment, what?
As to the impeachment about Ukraine, because for 2.5 years or 2 years, we were talking about this Russian collusion and whether that was in the Mueller report.
Jeff,
So
I don't know that you might be the only
on.
person in the United States that think the Republicans didn't make their case on Ukraine. I don't know who else says that. I mean, they talk themselves blue in the face on this.
Because the essence of the case, Terry, the essence of the case would have been, there's nothing wrong with me calling up the president of Ukraine.
They said that, and they even released, as you know, the president released the transcript.
No, but he also said there was no quid pro quo, okay?
Right.
There was whole effing thing was on no quid pro quo. And all I'm saying, that's relatively inconsequential here. The president was exercising his foreign policy powers, and he should have just said that, okay? I'm trying to get this guy to go. I'm trying.
He
I'm
did
trying
say
to
that.
get
He
this.
said under Article 2, I can do, referring to foreign affairs, I can do what I want.
And
The
I can
president
actually
has the
withhold,
authority under the
and
Constitution.
I can withhold military assistance.
Right.
I can, not forever, and just say I did for a while. I wanted to talk with him about this other matter. We're going back and forth. We're trading. That's how foreign policy is conducted. Okay.
Let me,
He didn't want to take that. That was a big gamble to take it. But had he done
Before
the
we
policy,
move
that would have been.
before we move entirely off the impeachment, there's a look forward here. They voted, we don't know when it'll go to the Senate. Nancy Pelosi could hold this forever. Now, once we elect a new Congress, I would argue, that's dead. You start everything new. You can't carry legislation from one Congress over to a new Congress.
Right.
So she could sit there and never send the articles of impeachment over to the Senate if she wants. So as we said, will the Democrats pay a price for this? We don't know. But the other thing is, there is an ongoing investigation into, was there collusion between the FBI at the top, between members of the Department of Justice. That has been investigated, as we know, by the DOJ's Inspector General, Mr. Horowitz. He famously talked to the House the other day, but he talked about a week ago, just a little over a week ago, I believe on the 11th. And let's listen to a part of his testimony as he was speaking to Senator Hawley of Missouri, who himself was an attorney general.
There are significant serious failures here on the operation of the, particularly in connection with the FISAs, whether it was sheer gross incompetence that led to this versus intentional misconduct and what the anything in between and what the motivations are. I can't tell you.
You're not making that decision.
I can't tell you as I sit here today because I don't have enough evidence to reach a conclusion.
But if someone were to characterize what you are telling us to be that you're telling us there is no bias here, that's not what you're telling us.
That is not as to the operation of these FISAs what I'm telling you.
All right.
So Mr. Horowitz is saying he was not saying there was not bias in the in how these FISAs, those are the special court that was set up to look at whether or not when the FBI is spying on people. These FISAs, there were 4 applications. Mr. Horowitz says he can't say there was bias in the launching of the investigation of the president, but he said he's not saying that there wasn't necessarily bias in these applications of the FISAs. That's also being investigated by John Durham, who's a special prosecutor out of Connecticut, and he has the authority to bring criminal indictments. So, Jeff, before people think as we wrap up 2019, this is going to carry over into 2020. We'll have to see how far. We don't know. You and I don't know. No one knows when Durham will bring indictments, if he does bring indictments, but that's something for people to put on their 2020 radar, these issues.
Well, I thought he was coming close to saying what you just said he didn't say. He basically found 17 very significant errors, but he refused to put them together to say, overall, even though I don't have strong testimonial I don't have strong testimonial evidence. I don't have strong documentary evidence. A lot of that relates to my powers not being as strong as John Durham will have. He could have said. But overall, I think it's hard to see the actions of the FBI on these major matters, all these errors going one way and not concluding bias. He could have said that, Terry. He didn't. And whatever, maybe his view of his role, maybe he's the kind of guy. But what somebody should be saying in the media, what I just said, this matter is not over, which you just said, it's not over. It's going to Durham. We'll see what he has to say about this. And that may come out, in the middle of the year or sooner. So this will be an election issue, okay?
By the way, Jeff, before we close off on this, and let's close off on impeachment,
Yeah.
but before we go, mention the Democrats on the House are very sensitive about the argument that they've got nothing done in the years that they've been in 2019. They've done nothing but this impeachment stuff, haven't done the people's business. So they had a press conference following their vote last night where they tried to enumerate all these different things they have done. We can't say, and this is significant, that earlier today, I believe, the House passed the USMCA. That's the trade pact that the president put together for Mexico, the United States, and Canada. And now that will be going over to the Senate. So at least the Republicans were always enumerating that that's one of the things that we should be working on. Well, now the Democrats in the House have passed that, and that was a bipartisan vote, so now that's going to the Senate. Also, speaking of getting things done legislatively, Governor Pritzker had a very successful spring session in 2019. He also had a successful fall veto session. And one of the things that they passed, which the governor likes to point out, other governors had tried to do for 70 years, is they passed a bill that would consolidate 615 pension plans of the various police and fire, basically of the downstate people, not Chicago. Combine those into two, one for the firemen, one for the police. Earlier this week, the governor took a victory lap as he signed that into law. Let's listen to what he said were the benefits of that legislation.
The consolidation of these funds could result in greater returns of up to $2.5 billion over just the next 5 years, and they will likely earn billions more over the next 20 years. This consolidation also marks a vital step forward for our fiscal future, a future that we've already strengthened through our bipartisan balanced budget that starts to pay down the backlog of bills from our predecessor.
Well, Terry, I was at that press conference. He had 40 people, mostly, well, legislators, staff, and so forth behind him. It was a big deal. Obviously, he was elated. Obviously, he thought it's a major accomplishment. And it is significant, but I raised a few points. I think you have I think you have his response.
Well, first, because we couldn't hear your question, what was it that you asked him?
Oh, well, what I said to him essentially is that this is significant. Entities have questioned overall how important this is to the pension issue, and they have contended it's less than 4%. Because the state of Illinois has a $270 billion, when you count healthcare, in unfunded pension liability. And the city of Chicago has $70 billion when you look at it from the Moody's perspective and you count healthcare as well. And you count, healthcare maybe and also CPS. So you got a $70 billion unfunded pension liability.
So basically your question was,
you got
does this really matter
$340
because you have such a massive debt? Is that it?
You have $340 billion in pension liability, and as WirePoints and others say, you're dealing with like 4%. WirePoints is an entity that investigates, that provides information, focusing on financial issues.
Basically, they're conservative financial analysts who look at public policy and kind of say, you know, here's what the numbers really are, because they don't trust the government numbers, I would say.
Well, I wouldn't say they're conservative. I think they're financial analysts. And they believe in, I think they tend to believe in the importance of markets. And so they look at this pension liability through that prism and say, what do the bondholders say? What are the issues they would raise and that type of thing? And if you're not dealing with the issues that the bondholders want dealt with, you're going to pay the price and higher interest rates.
Okay, so you asked the governor if this really matters, him signing this consolidation into law. Let's listen to his answer.
So let me start with, organizations like WirePoints want to diminish what's been accomplished here by saying, well, we have so much more to do. The reality is that so little has been done in the past, and this is a monumental accomplishment after 70 years of people trying. It is evidence that we can tackle the most intractable problems of our state. It is also evidence that we have a lot of challenges and that we've got to go at it every single day, every week, every month, particularly in the area of pensions. And I've been doing that. I mean, everybody around here knows that the challenges that I've identified on the fiscal side of things, on the economic growth side of things, pensions, property taxes, balancing the budget, diminishing our backlog of bills, and then growing jobs in the state, that those are things that I think about every single day, that I've proposed solutions to, that I continue to work on. We can't get it all done at once.
Okay, so he basically, and I went on to ask another question. We don't have the clip there, but Essentially, I said to him, Governor, considering you're only dealing with 4% of the issue, what do you do to deal with the remaining 95%? And what he said, well, I've started to, we've we've had a consultant in to look at some matters. We've looked at a buyout of people in the state of Illinois who have pensions. He's estimated, I think, some numbers that seem very high, $25 billion. I said, do you have documentation? Could we get it later, and so forth? And he gave some response to that. But the short of it is, we know in the state of Illinois very little how that 95% of pension liability will be dealt with. And to his credit, the governor said, yes, we're starting to work on that now. There's a long way to go, and we're going to have to chip at this, bit at a bit. But I think looking ahead to 2020, that issue will be joined. There will be the governor's issue, maybe a buyout, we don't know what else, but he clearly made very clear he doesn't want to renege, as he might put it, on this issue of modifying pension benefits at all for the state, for the city employees, so forth. The other side is there's no solution unless you start cutting pension benefits. The other side says you have to amend the Illinois Constitution so you can. You have to give the cities and villages the power to bankruptcy so they can restructure. You have to have probably the state of Illinois look to the feds to see if they would have the power for bankruptcy to restructure. That issue, I believe, it may not be, it will be addressed somewhat in 2020. Obviously, the big issue for the Constitution in 2020 is the governor's proposal, which is now on the ballot in November 2020 for a progressive income tax. And there will be a lot of emphasis in 2020, obviously, for the pros and cons, and a lot of, and in the various interests that will argue against the progressive income tax and for that.
And Jeff,
But he went on to,
go ahead.
Go ahead. He went on to say, and I think you have that in the clip, that part of his agenda, it's a good part of it's pensions, but it's also high property taxes. It's also dealing with the bill backlog. It's also dealing with balancing the budget, and it's also dealing with job growth.
If we want to look at
and economic growth in Illinois. And the point is that he's starting to emphasize those 5 points more and more. I assume at some point the Republicans will get their act together, which they don't, and have some organized person to speak on their behalf, because there are many Republicans who take a different view than the governor on those points. They agree those are important,
right,
but they wouldn't solve them the same way. Predicting in 2020, we're going to see that issue joined, I think, by Democrats and Republicans.
Right, and so we're going to hear a lot about the progressive income tax, as you say. We're going to have a lot of, obviously, an election year. You and I will be focusing on the races. We've talked about this before. The 6th congressional race, the 14th congressional race, those were Republican districts that flipped to the Democrats last time. And if the Republicans are going to take over the House at the U.S. Congress, they're going to need to pick up those kind of seats, and so we'll be focusing on those among others.
And just to say, both of those incumbents in the Democrats in the 6th and 14th, and those are areas that are viewed as somewhat Republican, even though they elected Democrats, somewhat conservative.
And people said that
both of those Democratic incumbents voted to support impeachment.
Right.
That may be an issue in both.
Right. I think it'll be across the nation, and certainly I think here. And other people have argued that those Republican districts, or more Republican districts than Democrat, flipped because Governor Rauner was at the top of the ticket, and that he had such negative numbers, and people were just so fed up with his administration that a lot of Republicans, and this shows there were a lot of Republicans didn't go out and vote as they had in the previous year. So,
Terry, as the official timekeeper, how are we doing on time?
well, we're right at about 29 minutes into the show, so we don't have much time more than to say
say goodnight, Terry, and wish everybody a Merry Christmas and a Happy Hanukkah.
Yes, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah. We'll see you next time.
And a Happy Kwanzaa.